Okay. Chelsea, Nancy wanted to talk about it. Did you listen to the whole Tye Tribbett interview on Breakfast Club?
Yes, I listened to the whole
interview.
thing.
Welcome to Beyond the Letter.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome.
Welcome to Beyond. Were we recording? Are we recording? Yeah, we were recording. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Beyond the Letter. Here we in the house. We got Aaron in here. We got Chelsea in here. We got Gabriel in here. We got Alex in here, who's kind of become kind of our lawyer as well, making sure we cut things out or whatever, making sure.
Shout out to Alex.
Yeah. And then Alize in the house and
He's
Andy,
good for that. He's good at
edits.
being politically correct.
For sure.
Yeah,
for
that's
sure.
good. That's good.
He goes on the back end and edits anything that could turn into a Tye Tribbett situation. You know. Yeah. So if you don't know, as far as what I hear everybody kind of talking about in a lot of our Christian space is Tye Tribbett, who is one of the best worship artists in the world, and very gifted, very talented. He recently was on Breakfast Club, which is a famously critical radio show, Charlemagne the God and all that, but they have religious figures into their space often, right? Over the years, they've had Carl Lentz, Mike Todd, so-and-so and so-and-so.
TD
Jakes.
Yeah.
And it's essentially more of like a black kind of hip-hop culture, right? So, like, now they're of everyone else, like Lil Wayne, Post Malone. So that's who they're normally interviewing. But since in the black culture, Christian faith and black culture kind of intertwines, relatively historically, they tend to have religious figures on. But they're pretty highly critical of religious figures as well. Sometimes they're complimentary, but many times they're critical. So Tye Tribbett, famous worship leader, was recently on, who provides worship for churches all over, but tours, and I think he's a pastor too, right?
He has a
Pastors own
church.
Yeah, in Florida or something like that. And so he had some opinions he remarked. So we just saw the clip. You ended up watching the whole thing.
The whole thing.
Give me, before we I don't know if we have the clip or not, but do we have the clip, Andy? No? We'll get you the clip right now. But before we do, give us your synopsis on it, Chelsea, because you were I remember in our Slack, you were like, I went and listened to it.
I watched the whole thing. Yeah. So it started with, because he just won his first Grammy. So they brought him on, started talking about his Grammys, and he started talking about how early on his pride got in the way because he wasn't winning. He was always nominated, wasn't winning. So it started talking about pride and ego and how he had to get over that. Then they switched into the church world because Charlemagne the God grew up Jehovah's Witness, turned Christian. The other, I forgot who the girl is on the podcast. She grew up Baptist, so she's experienced, 4-hour-long services, 5-hour-long services. So they all have some type of religious, spiritual experience growing up. And they kind of alluded to a lot of stuff they've seen other churches doing that is completely out of line. Like swag surfing, to explicit songs during church, all of these things. So what happens is
Swag surfing?
Swag surfing. Yeah, which is like a dance.
Oh, that was the clip that went viral.
Yes.
They brought it up on there.
They brought it up on Charlemagne's on the podcast, Breakfast Club. And so Charlemagne said, hey, I can't trust a lot of what these people are saying because their lives aren't aligning to what they preach. So that is when Tye Tribbett then goes in and he starts talking about the church institution and how he thinks it's completely whack. He says, God is not the church. And I think we're going to play it and you'll hear, God's not the church. The church institution is whack. So he's basically trying to sway Charlemagne and everybody in the podcast, hey, this church institution, what y'all believe about it is correct, but God's not the church. The weird part is he has his own church, but he explains his church is only online. They don't meet in person. Because they had some issues with finding a building. Then he sat back and he realized, well, what is the need for the building? Let's just do this online. And he found a lot of fruit from it. And so, he started to throw some slight jabs on how a lot of pastors have done it wrong. But we as a society need to know that God is not the church. And the institution and how we've built the church has been whack. So do we have the video? Because I don't want to give it away.
They're pulling up.
Okay, I don't want to give away a certain thing that he says about it that I think is pretty wild and how he explains why the church is whack. Then the podcast ends. Y'all, I wouldn't even say go listen to it. The podcast ends with them. You know how Breakfast Club, they talk about a whole bunch of stuff, like us. We could talk about one topic here and then another one there. Then they ask Tye Tribbett, hey, have you ever been to a strip club before?
Okay.
And it just went left field. And Tye Tribbett explains, he was like, well, there was a period of his life where he was just like, kind of screw the church. Like, I'm done with this. He was married, but him and his wife separated. She lived in Jersey. He lived in LA, and they were doing their own thing, not really working on their marriage. During that time, he was kind of like, screw the church. And it was during those years, he was like, how old am I? I'm 48. So yeah, it was during one of those years that I went off. So it felt like it was recent. That's what it felt like. I don't know the years. But he said, yeah, he had experienced all that stuff. So he was trying to, I feel like he was trying to make himself seem normal and fit in so that the people at the table didn't completely knock Christianity. Mm-hmm. So it was just, but his view of church and the institution of church was pretty interesting. And a lot of people in the comments, because that's what I do. After I hear something wild, what is everybody else saying? And they were so disappointed in him because he's a Christian on this really famous podcast that reaches a lot of non-Christians. And the thing that you have to say about the church is all negative. Didn't highlight anything positive about what the church is doing other than y'all are online. So that's why church folks were like, man, you squandered a really precious moment in front of probably millions of listeners.
How long was the interview?
It's only 49 minutes.
49 minutes.
Yeah.
Because here's
that section is maybe about like 9 or minutes or 8 minutes.
Because, anybody could take clips of a certain part of what people are saying and say, this is what the message was. And I haven't watched it yet, but during that time, because sometimes people try to go the long way around the mountain and try to find common ground, but then... No, but
like, let me say this: the church is whack, and then you talk for 5 minutes, and you come back around and say how it's not. Like
he didn't come back around.
Was there?
There was
that's what I was hoping for.
It's whack, but there's no. And even at the end, they asked, and maybe I interpret this incorrectly because I listened to podcasts on 2.5 podcast speed, so they're going fast. But
2.5 or
2.0. Sorry. I listened to 2.0.
That's so very fast.
Yeah, I listened to fast. Okay. Yeah.
My ADHD could never.
So at the end, they were like, are you going to pray for us? Are you going to pray for us? Oh. And they asked him. And so it was kind of like they were expecting him to be overly
pastoral.
Christian. Yeah, and he wasn't. And so, but there was no conversation about hope for the church or his belief in how the church can get better. Because I'm okay to talk about how it's whack, but I would like to see how you perceive it getting better, or what are you doing to help this
offer
whack
anecdotes.
There was no anecdote to a whack institution or even a hopeful side of the conversation.
So are you saying, like, if we watch this clip, we're pretty much giving it a fair shake for what he said is what he said?
Absolutely.
That's what I'm asking.
Like,
there's
I
not
think it's
more
fair.
I think you added a little bit of context, but there isn't much more context to what.
No, because they hop into a different conversation, and so he doesn't wrap it up or put a bow on it.
We have the Chelsea blessing, all right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important because sometimes, you'll listen to something in your comment, and then you'll go listen to the full, 45 minutes or whatever, and then you're like, that's not what they said at all. Okay. And I went and I tried to listen to. I listened to 10 minutes, not 40 today, and I had felt like it went into a new topic, but I didn't know, would it come back around or something before I...
and I don't think I wouldn't say or label this as Tye Tribbett's heart. I just don't think he put a bow on it. I don't think they went back to the conversation of, let me finish what I meant by this or what I believe the future of the church will be. It's kind of like, this is my thought, let's move on to the next topic.
Yeah.
So I think if they were bringing it back to part 2, he would elaborate much more about what he meant about that. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Let's play it, Andy. Play it.
I think it's a system now. Oh, God. It's a system. Everything is a system, and systems work with or without God. Mm-hmm. So I think the institution of church is whack. I think how church is ran is whack. I think the religious system and structure is whack. I don't subscribe to it, even though I grew up in it, I benefited from it, but I learned that God is not the church. And once I realized, whoa, God ain't church. That for me, you know what I mean? I ain't from the streets, I'm from the church. So that was a huge thing as well.
It's in the Bible. It says you can't even find God in a man-made temple.
Why don't we read that, though? How often do you hear that sermon? No, you hear people,
all the time.
Pastors make the people
literally every pastor I know.
We got the church name, we church, and the bumper sticker, the church. The church should be about the people. The church should be about the people, but the church makes the people about the church. So all churches now are a movement, but they're not about the people. They're not about serving and loving the people. Yeah. What do y'all look for when you go to a church? What do y'all look for? Like you said, everyone don't touch your soul, don't minister to your spirit.
It's not about what I look for, it's about what I feel.
Got it.
It's a feeling, you know what I mean? Like you just
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Some people just speak to your soul. Like,
Yep.
you know, I think Sarah Jakes right now, man,
She
at least
talking
for
to you.
me,
She
oh my
talking to you.
God,
I love
like
it.
all the time.
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
like
So
even when I'm just
practical, so-
listening to her podcast, so I just think some people have an anointing on them for the moment that we are in. And just like her father had it and still has it, you know,
Yeah, of
I
course,
think she
of
has
course.
it for the current moment that we're in.
Word.
And then another thing, so growing up in a church where, you know, I'm so used to that back in the day. Like, for instance, I don't want to go to a big church because the pastor don't know me. The pastor don't. I'm used to going to talk to the pastor after church, going to get that individual
the
prayer, going to tell
personal,
him what I'm struggling with and all that. As a teenager, I was going through a lot of things, you know what I mean? So I would be able to go and talk to my uncle. He is the bishop, like go and talk to him and stuff like that. But I've gone to churches where, you know, pastor don't even know you, and he not even tripping off getting to know nobody. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He just come and he do his thing. They sing a whole album before he start the sermon. He,
Only one album?
Yeah, yes, right? You shout. I see
You can
people
cut it
shout,
there.
and
That's
I
the
see,
gist
you know,
of
all of that.
she just goes on.
All right. We're listening to the podcast now.
Right now we're listening to their full
the whole thing.
podcast.
So yeah, that's what everybody's going crazy about.
I would like Aaron's.
Yeah, because he had faces. You have faces.
He's like this. He's like
Breathing all heavy.
like an old church mother.
Oh, baby.
I just want to take him to dinner.
If you look at anytime about, let's see what Aaron has to think about this. It's complex. I'm a pastor's kid, and my personality.
And he says that in it at one point at the beginning. He says, I grew up a pastor's son. I was expected to be bop, 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 bop. My parents were pastors. My dad played the organ. My grandpa was a pastor. Bop, bop, bop. Never been in the world in that way, except for the guess later on in life with the
later
strip
on.
clubs and everything like
Yeah.
that. But
He said it, not me. He did say he was praying for himself in the strip club, though. So he hated it
Everybody's got to
instantly.
pray somewhere.
I have a love for pastors' kids. My kids are pastors' kids. I don't think those comments should be on the Breakfast Club. I think those comments should be in safe rooms where he's processing and questioning thoughts. And that's where community comes in, counsel comes in, because he is a pastor. And the more you grow and influence, the more you're responsible for your words and the more risk you're at being misunderstood, et cetera, et cetera. So I started getting sensitive listening to that because I don't think God was getting glory in those comments. However, love believes the best. So, but leadership keeps people at their best. So it's like I would have leader to leader questions for him because he says, I don't subscribe to church. You're a pastor. What does that mean?
Yeah.
How are we discipling people in an only online context? You're saying you're benefiting from the church, but the church is whack. Why benefit from something that's whack? So then I just think very practically, because he's talking about the systems of church. Okay. I have a system for waking up in the morning. It's my alarm clock. So do we eliminate all systems? So the first thing I do when I get up in the morning is I thank God for waking me up. I don't thank my system for waking me up because I'm mature enough to think that way. And we got to understand as shepherds, people aren't mature enough to process, do I give God glory for this or my church glory for this at this time? And that's where a lot of hurt and a lot of misunderstanding comes from. But we are now making global comments about Jesus' bride. That's what I have an issue with. I would find more comfort if he said, this church that I went through and experienced this was whack for me. That makes it very personal for him because I don't believe all churches are whack. I don't believe all systems are whack. Like we have systems. Hey Siri, remind me at 10 a.m. That's a system.
And the hard part is he didn't describe what systems within the church were whack. He only talked about, hey, churches make the people about the church, not about them. But he didn't what systems, what about the institution, and that's where I would have liked more clarity. Probably not on Breakfast Club, but maybe even with another leadership Christian podcast, that would be a healthy conversation to have. But that was hard for me. What about it are you saying?
It's super general.
It's so
super
generalized.
general. It almost making it seem like the church never pops up in the Bible, period. And this is a completely fabricated.
That's where his eyes got
completely
big.
fabricated
Man-made,
thing, and I was like, whoa.
So I'll let's make this very practical. I have a wife. Okay, the church is Jesus' bride. Okay, there are things I don't like about Erica, but that's my wife. You're not going to talk negatively about my wife. I will protect my wife. I will, right? So it's like, but there are things, because love covers a multitude of sin, that me and my wife are working through that people won't understand. But when you hear Aaron, I'm going to be a representative for my bride. Right? That's just that's just very practical. So if you hear me saying, well, Erica this and then Erica that, blah, blah, that's not just on Erica. That's on my character now. So if I'm called to be a pastor and I'm a representative of the church, then I should be part of the solution.
Yeah.
Not just complaining about the problem. I have some responsibility, and I'm called with skin in the game to help a culture understand that, no, you misunderstand church. Because when you look at the letters and it says, okay, church, God is not church. Okay, yeah, I rock with that. But we don't have to demonize something that Jesus is using as a means.
Right.
So I don't rock with those comments, but I'm the personality where, hey, man, I just got some questions. I'll give you an example. I am a pastor. As a campus pastor, I was doing altar calls every single week. But internally, as I'm reading the book of Acts, I have questions about altar calls. So that I don't share that to the world. I share that with my leader. I share that with my father. Because I'm responsible to be a leader and proclaim certain things, but faith is following Jesus with questions. I don't have to have it all figured out to be a leader, but I have to be mature enough on where do I take these conversations. And I don't think, I think if he would have said, the church is whack, comma, here's what I think is blah, 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 I would still have an issue with the church is whack. But if he were to make that very specific, like you said, and as a leader, I have faith that if we started doing this is now you're talking leadership. But leaders talking solutions, followers talking problems. So it's easy to go viral if you're divisive. It's easy to go viral if you side on one side. And right now the culture is saying church is whack. So if I'm a church leader and I say church is whack, and my strategy is like, hey, you can have God without church, that's very risky,
right?
Because Jesus didn't say that.
Yeah, people could be walking away from that comment, or even it turns out the whole podcast, even having all the context and being like, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, I follow God. No church.
Correct.
Church is whack. I can just stay away from church.
And that was
period.
That's the common comment, because he like that post we just shared is not someone clipping it. That's on his Instagram. He collaborated that with Breakfast Club. So he is doubling down that he's not saying, oh, I got to add more clarity.
He's not adding
blah,
context.
blah, blah.
No.
He's saying, this is my opinion, this is my view, period. And like, it's very concerning when he's making a lot of, like you said, a lot of overgeneralizations. And to me, here would be me, and this is why he would never go on a Christian podcast. To me, he's speaking out of insecurity. He's not speaking out of confidence. And that's why I would be very shocked if you ever caught Tye talking to anyone that was a peer to him, whether it be our podcast or another podcast, that would actually question him on some things rather
his
than
ideology.
Yeah, dog, you so right. Yeah, dog, yeah. You say you listen to Sarah Jakes, but she has 9 churches all across the world or whatever it is, right? Like, who do all the traditional stuff that you're clowning, and that Charlemagne's agreeing with him. Oh yeah, you're right. You're right. Well, TD Jakes and Sarah Jakes has a church every single week and has a church name and da-da-da-da-da, like, but you just kind of brush through that and just, I like her messages, but they're preaching the system of the church at the same time. So how are you critically dealing with that? And he makes some really, and it wasn't fully all of it clip, but I've now heard that whole 10-minute segment. He makes this generalization where Tye begins to make fun of pastors who go to college to become pastors, to study the Bible. He goes, you got pastors going out here, they go to college, they learn the Bible, and they think they could just become a pastor now, just like becoming a manager at Kroger after college.
Yeah, that's what he said. Because they were like, why would we follow these pastors who aren't living what they preach? And he was like, well, because not all of these pastors are called. Some of them, it's like a business. You go and you...
But how long do you not live what you preach? If it seems like he was in ministry and he was separated from his wife going to strip clubs, he would be like, you know what, guys, I shouldn't be on this podcast right now because I'm in this cohort. Mm-hmm. You know, he's not preaching God's grace. He's preaching you have no right if you're not called or if you're not living right, and you're a person who did that. So now you got to qualify. How long does it have to take from you praying for yourself in the strip club to you now leading a church online? Yeah. You know, like,
yeah. And I don't know if it was Tye that said this following that or somebody else, but they were like, pastors aren't perfect. Just like your math teacher. I can't remember if it's Tye or the other guy, but if your math teacher is teaching you math concepts and they're correct, but their life is wrong, doesn't mean what they're teaching is wrong. Mm-hmm. And so he did, I can't remember if it was Tye, but which there was some truth in that. Like, not all pastors are perfect. However, again, it was this overgeneralization of most of y'all pastors shouldn't be because they're not called.
Well, I mean, yeah. And like, I would, and that the problem is he's saying most, you know, that's like a silly overgeneralization. Most, like, so you've met most pastors, you know, like I'd never make a comment and say like something like all politicians are corrupt. No, there are some corrupt politicians. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I also believe there are some politicians who get into politics because they genuinely want to help people. You know, like to just say, hey, this is how it is. And you can say, oh, I think we have a problem right now in politics that it seems like a lot of them are not about the people. You could say something like that. But to say the system, all this stuff is just ridiculous. But yeah, it's crazy to say the system of the government is completely whack, but then you go pick up a Social Security check on Friday. You know, like. For sure.
Which is crazy. Like, most of his, from what I believe, the people that listen to his music that helped him win a Grammy,
they're all in the system.
They're all in the institution. Yeah. The people, most of the money that you got in your bank come from people who believe in or are in this institution. So you're calling something that is whack that you, like you said earlier, are not just have benefited from, continue to benefit from. Sure. Yeah. So I'm okay if you have issues with it, but what I'm not okay with and what I wasn't okay with and kind of hurt my heart was, let's talk about some of the benefits of the church as well. Yeah. None of that was mentioned on this podcast.
Just giving us overall
assessment of God's church.
And within it, there's a couple other things that like he says that is just like really errant, which is the kind of what Aaron talked about, but like God is not the church, which we hear all the time. People are always trying to qualify that. And then, we know God is not the church, but God has the church. It's his. So now you got to explain that. You know, because that reality does exist. You read majority of the New Testament, the Church of Ephesus. The churches are referenced. The Church of Rome, like the churches are referenced by their city, by a place, by a known entity. They're individualized according to their cities. You read Revelations. You got the 7 churches of Asia. So you have all these things like these are individual churches that make up a broader church. So clearly God cares about this thing called church. And then they make statements like the church is not a building, it's not a place, it's a name, it's the people. Obviously, we know that's not hard to... Never heard a pastor not say that. Mm-hmm. Never heard a pastor disagree with that. The only problem is a person who says the church is not a place or a building or blah, 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 or people. What they're actually saying, because their practice says otherwise, is church is a person and it's me.
Right.
And
it's 2 extremes.
Yeah. Because I'd say, oh, you're fine. Oh, yeah, that 4 walls? Cool. So where do you gather with the people? Well, I don't, because I'm the church. No, you're not. You are not the church. You are far from the church, and I am far from the church.
Right.
We are the church.
Yes.
Together, the ecclesia is the church. The called out ones who gather together, that is the church. So how and where are you doing? You do it with 5 people in your living room. Cool. You're being the church. But at some point, you are getting outside of yourself. The problem is the average person who's on Tye's Instagram right now going, that's right, Tye, tell him. That's why I don't go to church no more. Like, listen, you're not in the church. You're not of the church. You're not considered part of Christ's church. You may be, for some reason, considered a believer of some sorts, but you are not in his church or of his church. Because it's not about a person, it's about a people. And so he makes that statement, and most people who go that road, they're trying to debate why they have individualized Christianity.
You're trying to justify it. Yeah. 100%.
And 9 times out of 10, those people are unfortunately, consistently chewed up and swallowed by Satan. I have rarely met someone who carries that philosophy of ministry that says, I'm the church and I do church by myself and I'm at home by myself. 9 times out of 10, they struggle with some type of loneliness. They struggle with a numerous amount of private sins. They have very difficult marriage relationship with their spouse. Like it is very uncommon that someone like that has an actual model that they could take you to that says, yeah, and I'm healthy. Because that's not what God created. That's not what you could call it an institution. You call it a system. You call it whatever you want. You could say that it's flawed. You could say it has errors. But to me, that's why I think Tye's speaking out of insecurity. And to me, in some ways, I talk to him and try to ask some more questions. But the way this leads me to is he shouldn't be a pastor, because you shouldn't be a pastor if you don't know that in the Bible there are imperfect churches. Read the book of Revelations, read 1 Corinthians, read 2 Corinthians. So for you to say, I know imperfect pastors, I know imperfect churches, therefore the system is whack, then you're not a student of the Bible.
Right.
You're a Christian.
And I think his definition of what being a pastor might not be what we all believe being a pastor is.
That's why my most empathy in that video is when that woman was speaking.
Oh, yeah.
Because I have daughters.
Yeah.
So the church is whack. We don't like systems. But she talked about a system. My uncle, you can individually talk to the pastor when you're going through something.
Yeah.
I'm not raising my daughters that way. And I'm a pastor.
Yeah.
I want to raise my daughters with values that when you're going through something, you pray. You put your faith out there. You partner with your community. And then if you have access to a pastor, he's going to complement your faith. But you don't need your pastor's prayers.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Like, so it's like,
and the reality for her, I don't know if her uncle, because she said my uncle's still a pastor, but she makes it sound like she don't go there no anymore.
No, she does.
So,
she does. Well, she doesn't physically go there. She listens online because her job doesn't allow her to make that drive. So she says, I still tithe. She said, I belong to my church still. But she doesn't physically find herself there.
but that's where it's like, alert, discipleship. Like.
But this is also another comment they made about that, which is I questioned the discipleship portion in it. Charlemagne and the other guy, they were talking about, we watch service online because I can hardly find a church that feeds me, which is why Charlemagne was talking about it's not just, it's a feeling. It's something that I feel. So they listen to Sarah Jakes and all these people that make them feel a certain way, which we find a lot of people subscribe to Tye Tribbett's model of church online because they want a sermon or a message that makes them feel good, not necessarily makes them better, makes them feel good. Right. So that was another part. It's like it's like putting our discipleship in our own hands because we're only listening to people that we like or messages that we like. So my question was, where is the discipleship in that when you're pinpointing the messages that you want to listen to online?
For sure.
I think it was just he made a comment that fed into an echo chamber that was already there at the table, and so they were ready to just feed into it. He's like, yeah, and then when that woman spoke, it was just again a bunch of generalities, it's like, wait. We have a big church, and Pastor Adam's out there every Sunday shaking hands with whoever wants to be known because it is a situation. But a big part of the system that's failed is discipleship, is togetherness it's not just a singleness. And so it's wild jumping into that conversation, saying those things, and almost like a self advertisement of, and come to my church online, which kind of preaches all these things of being individuals and like, you're not having any togetherness there. And it's like,
it's interesting how every single one of them is contradicting each other.
Yes.
Because you have Tye saying what he says, and then you have Charlemagne going, which Tye runs a church and still relies on tithing and all that stuff like that. I'm sure you could donate to his church, which will go to what? I don't know, and so I'd ask questions about that. Like, how does an online church, what community are you reaching? How, what does that look like?
That's what I had a question about, because he said, I have an online church and we're successful. And I was like, well, what is he measuring the success? Is it the tithing? Is it the numbers of online viewing? Like, what's this? It can't be discipleship, is it? What does that even look like?
Right. I would say here's the complexity of mega church that people don't understand. That there are people that are a part of Abundant Living Family Church that at this time could have the perspective of Charlemagne the God. I listen online, I get inspired. Could have the perspective of Tye. I used to be a pastor, I think church is what. Could have of that girl that grew up in church, and they're all gathered in our house. The complexity is, like, they all could be wearing an ALFC hoodie. And the pastors have to be spiritually mature enough and be called to say, hey, this is the weight of what it's like to be in this community. That when I communicate something, I'm communicating to people that are not saved yet, or have unrealistic expectations of church, or are church hurt, or are single moms, are Republicans, are Democrats. But that not every pastor's called to. But then when we make this general statement about the church, there's people that watch this. Their church is 24 people.
Yeah.
And it's a healthy, thriving church. Right. So when you see a church with 240 people or 2,400 people or 24,000 people, there is different worlds. Right. It's still basketball, but it takes so much systems to run an NBA organization. Right. Than to do a sports league at the community park.
Right. And that church with 24 people are playing his songs, and they're listening to this like, dang. He came after us like that. The systems failed, but we rocking with Tye like it's a whole worship song.
But then you have the girl who's like, I want a church where I can know the pastor, not these big ones where he don't know who I am and he don't care who I am, and it's like there's 300,000 churches in America. There is less than 10,000 of them would be considered a mega church. So that means there's over 300,000 churches. So 290,000 churches in America are churches where pastors have the ability to know every single one of you. The average church size in America, with those mega church included, is 150 people.
Yes.
200 people. Yeah.
So she's giving a criticism that is so minute.
Yes.
That's like that's like having a gas station on every corner. But there's one particular gas station. There is one. There's the Arcos that only take debit. Mm-hmm. It's like saying, man, I hate gas stations, because all those gas stations that only take debit, sometimes I want to use my credit card, and there's always those Arcos that take debit. Someone will be like,
go to Shell.
Yeah.
So be like, there are, for every 10 gas stations, only one is going to be an Arco. You have 9 other options.
But that's not good enough. It's shut down Arco.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Arco's.
What if you just
Wack.
don't understand Arco?
Yeah. And the reason why Arco only takes debit is because they don't want people to do chargebacks on credit cards and then lose money. So they only, I think only recently they started taking credit card, but for the longest it was debit only, because people would get gas and then charge back it on their credit card and they'd lose the money, because wherever they would put their gas stations, that was a thing people did. So they're like, no, you know what? We're doing debit only, because that's what has to work for us for us to operate. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so they're all kind of contradict, because you have Charlemagne who's like, I don't care if the pastor ever knows me. I like Sarah Jakes. She's inspiring me. It's for my feelings.
Right.
You have Tye who's like, the church ain't about you, it's about what you're doing for people, which Charlemagne's not doing in that sense. That's not his conviction. He's not articulating that. And then you have the other girl who's like, I need to know my pastor, but I'm watching online because I can't go on Sundays. So you're like, by all y'all's statements, you guys are part of the problem. We're all part of the problem.
Yes.
But you're making it sound like you know how church ought to be when all of y'all do not have a single alignment in what you're saying you expect the church would be, which, hello, that's now how we get to the church. Because every church that you guys are expecting to look for, at least in America, it exists.
Yeah.
So there are churches who are just absolutely killing it on the online space. There are 290,000 churches in the area where you could know the pastor every Sunday because there's only about 50 to 100 people going to that church. So you got that for you. You got the large churches because you want excellent expressions of whether it be worship or you want more than likely, if it's a mega church, you know, that pastor is more than likely an incredible communicator. So that's rare. So what they're saying is we want the pastor to do everything. That's what I struggle with Tye saying. It's like if he's a bad preacher, he's not called. No, that could just not be his strength of his fivefold ministry. Like he could be a great pastor who can
shepherd,
cry at funerals and counseling.
There's
and,
hundreds of pastors who get them in a room with people, killing it and pastoring them, but aren't the best with proclaiming the gospel publicly in front of 200,000 people. So you can't say that person is a bad pastor just because they're not strong in one area of the fivefold ministry.
Well, put it in his field. He's traditionally a worship leader. There's a lot of terrible people leading worship on Sundays. You know, but that doesn't mean man, worship is wrong. We got to take this out. Have you ever been to these churches and heard these worship these blah 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 blah? No, you just go man, everybody has a different level of how the person on their team can sing and lead, and also oh man, some of these worship songs are so phony and self-centered. Don't sing those. You know, we don't sing those very often ever. So it's like you just don't sing those. But I went in on a podcast, be like, you know what? All worship today is whack.
Yeah.
It's such an overgeneralization. And I wouldn't, on Beyond I Do, say, you know, we've been on this big thing that marriage isn't a contract, it's a covenant. That's like me on Beyond I Do later this week going, marriage is whack. The system of marriage is whack. The institution, all looking at my wife and go, we do covenant. And then you go, explain what covenant as Adam is. And I'm like, bop, 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 bop. And you go, isn't that what marriage is supposed to be?
Aren't you married?
Yeah.
How can you say marriage is whack?
But that's the government made me do that. That's why. But it's kind of excuse on why I get to still participate in it. Well, I have to participate in it because that's how I can leave the biggest impact. And it's you don't have to do anything.
But that's so this is spiritual, and this is where it's our skin in the game is required if we're going to say we're a Christ follower. So it's my skin's not required in the game if I'm saying I'm a Laker fan. I wear a shirt that says Lakers, or I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican. I insert myself in my opinions about things, but I don't have to go to practice. I don't have to give speeches. I can just talk about what's wrong. The same thing happens with Christians, where I can wear church merch, I can have it on my bumper sticker, what have you. But then it's we have all these Christians, pastors, et cetera, that have their worldview of what the church should be, without being aligned with Scripture on Jesus' vision for the church, but are just spokespeople for it. And when they have influence, they can influence people that may be fans of church, but they're not followers of Jesus yet.
Yeah.
And they're experiencing hurt, and they're looking for ways because that's what the culture is doing now. If I want to learn how to do something, I could just go to YouTube, TikTok, blah, blah, blah. And so if I do that, I'm going to try to do that spiritually too, if I don't know. So when you hear an influencer talk about that, then it's yeah, you know what? I didn't really want to go to church anyways. Because when I first started making church a discipline, I didn't want to come Sunday
There's a certain
and Wednesday.
Inconvenience to it.
Why would I come Wednesday? I work on Wednesday. No, that's what I was asking. Well, the pastor's saying come on Wednesday. I don't want to go Wednesday. I'm tired.
Right.
It wasn't a benefit to my life because I didn't have that as a discipline at that time. But thank God my church was patient with my values then. Those are the complexities of church that people aren't talking about. That in a church, you are trying to find unity with a lot of people that don't share the same values, but get to say all these things about the pastor, about the church, about Jesus, about the Bible, but no skin in the game yet.
Right. And it didn't make you feel good at first.
I gotta make you feel good?
Yeah, I gotta come on. That doesn't make me feel. That doesn't make me feel good. And I think that might be something that united them all was they all wanted it to feel a certain way. They all wanted it to feel good. It felt good to just be online. It felt good for the pastor to know my name. It felt good to hear a sermon. And that's my version of church. Is I listen to a sermon once a week or whatever it is, as long as it makes me feel good, because then I'm gonna bounce and go to the next person that'll make me feel good, and that's what it's about.
And I don't know a single pastor that, like, if their church does a bumper sticker or merch or something like that, none of them do it because they go like, this is gonna grow our church. Somebody's gonna see that bumper sticker and be like, oh, that church is, I gotta go
change
to
my
that
life.
church. It changed my life. That T-shirt changed my life.
Bunker stick.
It's like no one does that. You do it because the people make up the community. People are proud to be called the community, and so if you just said like Tye, like that's right, then we're not going to have the name of our church, which he does have a church name, and you're like, and we're just going to be the church, and you do a shirt called The Church. Well, guess what? You just became a brand called The Church. So it's like that is the way life operates. That's how people operate, and so people like to be proud of where they're being fed, where they're being encouraged. People love to share that with other people. People love to see commonality. The amount of times I'm out somewhere and I see someone wearing our shirt, and it's just like immediately I know, oh, they go to Abundance. So I can walk up to them and we can start a conversation right away. Because I know that someone that was a stranger 30 seconds ago, they're wearing one of our favorite shirts or whatever. And I'm like, oh, man, you go to a blah, blah, blah. Tell me. And we connect and we start having a conversation. I hear their story. The church is now being the church. A bumper sticker. You see another person with a bumper sticker, like, oh, they go to my church. You know. Also, to me, it also reminds you in a very old Jewish sense how Jews wear kippahs and other things like that, which are meant to represent their faith. Like if you're going out wearing your church merch, I know people have said, man, when I'm wearing this or have it on my car or whatever, I'm conscious not to honk, give the middle finger, because it's a reminder to me that, man, I don't just represent me. I don't even represent the church building. I represent the qualities of who Jesus is. So when I wear this shirt, I gotta live above that standard. And well, it shouldn't take that to do that. You're right, but reminders, they don't hurt. You know, on my phone, I'll say, hey, remind me at 12 to get lunch, blah, 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 blah. You can't remember to get lunch?
I mean, and some people it does take that in the beginning. You know, like, it does take that until they get the spiritual maturity to reach a place where they don't have to have those reminders. Some people do need to go out and wear their church stuff just to keep them on track. Some people do need that. And so I was just at the gym yesterday. I had a ALFC a shirt on. I was working out. A girl comes up to me, "You're from ALFC?" I'm like, "How did you know?" I was like, "Oh, I didn't just forgot to have the shirt on." But just like we rock our favorite sports team, just like we wear other brands, I don't see the issue in wearing the brand of our community that we go to. It's not a problem.
And you could the way you say something, you could demonize anything. And that was kind of my problem with the statement, is like things that are naturally actually really good qualities. Tye said it as if they were bad. These pastors going to college and learning the Bible and going to teach.
Dang,
like,
that's good.
That's actually we want more of our pastors going and learning the Bible so that they could teach it. But you just made that sound bad. Man, these people proudly wearing their church shirts and proudly in the community representing their church. What? That's ridiculous. You're like, it's actually a really
I'm so happy of what my church is doing to benefit our community. And when I go to Ralph's, when I go to Stater Brothers, I want people to know what community I'm a part of. The same way when the Lakers win a championship,
I'm wearing my Lakers jersey.
And we're not gang members.
No.
So for us, our friends nearby, Water of Life, The Rock, The Way, Hillside. When I see someone with a Hillside shirt, I don't be like, hey, gang, you know, like, I'm ALFC, you know, like, no, it's like, hey, oh, you go to Hillside, bro, I love that shirt, oh, man, blah, 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 I go to Abundant, blah, 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 oh, that's great. And so it's not used as like It's not used as like the way he's making it sound like this level of like arrogance or this level of like, oh, as a pastor, you just want people to wear your church's name on it as if that benefits you in some type of way. It's like it doesn't. It doesn't benefit in any way
unless you got your pastor's face on your shirt.
Yeah,
That's
right.
different.
Yeah.
That's not what we're doing here.
Yeah. So it's like you could say anything bad. You could you could demonize anything. You could be like, oh, you went to a football game, so you wore a shirt with everyone else and just worshipped 52 guys on a field.
I just want you.
I just
want you to know, brother.
Right.
You got to be in the world, but not of it.
Yeah. What are you doing?
So we need to pray about that.
They got beer being sold there. Mm-hmm. They got people getting drunk. They get like, what kind of person are you to go to a football game? I thought you were a Christian. You could say anything like anything, and it sound like it's a legitimate critique because there's always something you can stretch. Yeah. There's always something you can say with a vocal tone. But when you like to me, when you were really listening to like what he's dogging on, I'm like, man, half of these things are actually like really good things that you're just and then the stuff you're saying, which is normal, which is, I don't know when my church never meets. Everybody watches on their phones, but we're closer than ever. Man, you got to help me. You got to help me because I don't. You just said that as if that's very normal, and that is very unnormal because with our online community, I talk to people all the time. Hey, I'm moving to Texas. I'm going to continue to watch online. I say, hey, continue to do that until you feel comfortable to get plugged into a community or until you open a community to start meeting with you to watch online. But you got to become the church at some point because watching online doesn't make you the church, nor do you individually make you the church. You gathering and being a disciple and accountability and community, the scriptures say, devoting yourselves to the teaching of the word and breaking of bread. That's how the church grew. And so there's a level where you have to be gathering, breaking bread, community, accountability that has to be there. The word has to be there. And so therefore, it doesn't sound to me like he was operating those things. Because you can have a real criticism of the way the church is. You look in light of like the documentaries people are trying to do on churches and church leaders and all that, you could be like, yeah, man, a lot of that stuff is whack. That stuff is like, and some pastors who abuse people and leadership that abuse people. Yeah, that's whack. That's so wrong. Man, let me tell you what's exciting about the church, And I saw this clip in light of then 3 days later, Terry Chris did an interview. He's that famous comedian, Christian comedian who got like tried to get canceled because of a false claim against him about
John Chris?
John Chris. John Chris.
The white guy, right?
Yeah.
The claim was false? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he just did it. Yeah, he just did a podcast. And,
I didn't know it was false.
And
I didn't know what happened.
He said he's a comedian, and there was like a statement that alleged he was forcing women to be intimate with him.
Intimate with him, yeah.
But turns out it was like 2 occasions, and he had an addiction to he had a sex addiction, but they were never forced. They were all consensual. Yeah. So the controversial thing, which no one talked about, is just, oh look, a Christian is having sex out of marriage. Yeah, which we have hundreds of people in our church every Sunday who are doing that. And so it's kind of the pot calling the kettle black in that way, but it was made to sound like he was forcing himself on women. But what he ended up doing was he ended up canceling his tour to not deal with any of the stuff, which made him look guilty. Okay. And
right, because he went dark for a while.
Yeah, over a year. And he went to rehab and everything like that. Rehab not because of the force, but just because he did have an addiction, which he came very clean about. The problem was, or not the problem, but the reality was he never fought it. He never tried. He never gave clarity because he just felt like he couldn't win, which he wouldn't have. There's no way.
No.
But there was nothing. Nothing went to court. There was nothing legitimized with it. So he was recently on a interview with a guy who was a Navy SEAL or something like that. He's a famous Navy SEAL podcast. Mostly all he does is interview SEAL Team 6 guys and, other kind of like very manly men and stuff like that. But I think he happens to be a Christian. So every once in a while, he'll invite Christian leaders onto it. So he invited John on it, and John shared that story. And so the guy was like,
that.
wait, so you never did anything wrong? He said, no, I just felt like if I fought it would have been a lose-lose. So I had to deal with my sin. My sin was a sexual addiction, so I had to go deal with that. But like me, in terms of doing anything that was, he's like, the only law I broke is the law of God, not any law of man, like. And so the guy was like, oh, okay. So it leads up, and he's talking about how like churches canceled my comedy tours and Christians, blah, 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 blah. So then later on they get in conversation, and the guy goes, man, so what's the hope? Because this guy talks about politics a lot and stuff like that. What's the hope of the future? And John says, the church is the hope of the future. Mm-hmm. And he was like, the thing that tore you down, canceled you, blah, 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 blah. He said, he basically is a paraphrase, but he's like, it's imperfect, but that is the hope. That's the model God has given us. Why would I? It embarrassed me, and people did me wrong or whatever. But that represented them. That didn't represent God's church. That is the hope of the world. That is what this world needs. And it was just like, I saw it within days of like,
of hearing Tye.
Ty's who like almost has no reason to bash the church because you became a millionaire off of it.
Just got a Grammy.
Just got a Grammy off of it, and so no shade, but like, and yeah, you can criticize the very thing you're in, and he was in it the longest, so we're right. Much of the side of the church he's been on is very dirty, is very twisted, and all that stuff like that. But like
then say that, don't generalize.
Yeah, right, for sure. But the person who actually kind of has every right to kind of give up on the church, demonize the church, being John, who like just got obliterated. And I remember those days on social media. He just get obliterated by every woman and every blah, 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 blah. And when he came back to start comedy again, they're like, who are you to think you could do comedy after what you did, blah, blah, blah. And he just kind of persevered. And then for him to say like, yeah, the church is the hope. Like you actually kind of have a lot of reasons to sit here on a global platform. This guy's podcast isn't a Christian podcast, just like the Breakfast Club. Mm-hmm. And he doubled downs on sharing the hope of the world is the church. And the church does weird stuff. And there's capitalism that can get into it, blah, blah. And he admits those things. And it's like, it's saying in those things. And those things go wrong, and it will go wrong. Anytime you have humans involved, something's going to go wrong, which you have to use wisdom and all these things like that and all that kind of stuff like that. But he goes, it is the hope. To then Tye's is whack. You're like, that's not the best statement.
Yeah, it was hard to hear.
It's really, I get what he's saying, and 80% of it I could agree with. He's just not clarifying,
communicating it the right way.
And unfortunately, to me, I think it is speaking out of more of an insecurity than a confidence on what the church ought to be like. And I honestly don't think, unfortunately, it exists in America that the moment a worship leader's ready to retire from traveling and worshiping, they start a church. And so, like, that's a very common thing. And so to me, just because someone led worship and does songs and they now have a church, it really doesn't make you the authority. And he may agree, I'm not authority on church, but you kind of are when you overgeneralize and you represent. Yeah. You represent to some people the epitome of what a church leader is because you've won a worship Grammy, you lead a church, and so there's other people looking at you saying, like, your statements about the church have to be correct because look at how far you've gotten.
And just confuses the younger generation. As I'm listening to you talk, if LeBron James if the Lakers become champions, LeBron James becomes MVP of the championship, and then he makes his speech as he gets his award. I just want everybody to know NBA is whack. Practices are whack. Coaches are whack. I've benefited from it. I have an online way of doing basketball now. But NBA, so then like for like young kids that are growing up that were just watching LeBron, like, yo, but you're going to your son's game. It just causes a lot of confusion that, well, you're holding the trophy from the sport.
Yeah,
right. This is spiritual, but I'm just trying to have these parallels that once you've benefited and you're the leader of it, you will have a different vantage point than I have. Mm-hmm. You will see, you have access to things that I don't see, but then you're also responsible as a leader. Since I'm wrestling with these things, here's how I'm going to respond as a leader. Not to, this is us versus them, not to villainize, demonize, but you know what? I want to start something to help pastors. Because I think there's educated pastors that aren't called. I don't have to say that, but I could say, you know what? I want to help. I'm going to start this discipleship group or mentor, whatever, that's going to develop the next generation of leaders. Or, you know what? I want to help church planters be a part of the solution as opposed to just saying it's all whack, no clarity, then you have just a lot of people that are growing up in the sport or growing up in ministry like, well, what am I doing? So once my prayers get answered, am I going to have that perspective? Like,
Right. Well, I mean, I think more pastors go to school to study the Bible. Because if he had gone to study the Bible, you would see. But even because Pastor Adam brought up Revelation of the 7 churches.
Yeah.
And, John's recording everything that's happening, and at no point does the angel or Jesus be like, and the system failed. And the system's out of whack, because there's certain systems in the Bible for the church that we use to this day. We mentioned discipleship, we mentioned breaking up bread.
One church is lacking love. One church is lacking knowledge. One church is lacking,
right. And it doesn't end and we failed, so that's why the church is getting obliterated. It's like, well, no,
and that's the end.
Right. But to his point, the church isn't God. Right? The church isn't God. And that's what's good, because God's the one carrying it along. And God's the only hope for the church.
God, it's not God.
Exactly, because God's going to keep perfecting his bride and keep shaping her into what he needs it to be. And it wasn't even perfect right at the beginning when 100%. It launched. But that doesn't mean it's hopeless. And it doesn't mean the systems that God put in place for it to thrive have fallen. It just, the people
You had a
are
stepson
involved.
sleeping with his stepmother in Corinthians. Paul writes a letter.
Right.
He didn't say, and that's why I'm shutting down the church of Corinth. That's why you guys don't know what.
And that's
he said that's why you got to deal with sin, guys. You guys got to take this serious.
Yeah.
You got to. He's doubling down on the necessity of church, the necessity of discipleship. And he's not shutting the whole thing down because people are using the church to have sex or using the church for financial gain. And because he talks about it, he's like, man, some people are preaching for these reasons and these reasons, but let's thank God that Christ is being talked about. Let's get he's looking at the beauty of like this imperfect thing that God can still use to his glory, and God is using humanity. God could do it without humanity, but that is what makes God beautiful, that he wants us to be part of, as Jesus would save us. He wants us to be in the redemption story. And so like, you just, to me, you haven't read enough of the Bible.
And if anybody would say church is whack, it would be the Apostle Paul.
For sure.
On the cutting edge.
So
on the cutting edge of it.
Until Paul has this revelation with someone in the church when he was blind, someone in the community that can help him. Now the one that hated the church loves the church. You're talking about Corinthians. It's
Even through persecution, much like John. Paul is dude who was killing Christians. Now, you want to talk to me? I'm sure he dealt with a lot of that. So this man who dealt with a lot of criticism, was able to write beautiful letters about it. Not just talking about, hey, there's some things to clean it up. This is how we clean it up.
Yeah.
That's loving this imperfect, broken thing.
And a part of loving is there's 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. Have him depart, then people say, and then 2 Corinthians chapter 2. No, restore this brother, because so that's church.
Right.
It's a continued story.
Yeah, and nothing's new under the sun, and so that's why you're reading the New Testament. If we just want to focus on the New Testament, the problems that are in the church, they're there. There's problems. There's systems that are being abused. Even though they're in place, there's things that are being abused and things that are going wrong. But that doesn't mean we're just throwing the baby out with the bathwater and we're starting from scratch. Like it's not even in the Bible to begin with. And that wasn't even God's initial plan at all. And we had it all wrong from the beginning. It's all about feeling. It's all about only people, but not people together. It's people separate and what they want to do and how they want to feel. And that's it. And that's the hope of the future, is individualism. And that's it.
People don't know, because people are saying, well, if God is good, then why is the church look at that church leaders are fake? All these people getting canceled, all these people. Yeah. But if you look at the Bible, one generation after Jesus' resurrection, one generation later, you have Paul writing to Timothy, the next generation of pastors. Hey, man, you got to watch out for these men in the church. They're taking advantage of women. Hey, man, this person gossiped about me. He did me wrong. So the same things you're reading when Paul is developing Timothy is the same thing Pastor Diego warned me about.
Right.
So nothing's new under the sun. So people don't know those complexities are in the scriptures. That's why 2/3 of the New Testament are epistles to churches.
Yeah.
Because it's not like the church ended up, okay, now we got it perfect. Now we. No, one generation later, the same struggles we're dealing with 2,000 years later, there's scripture about. If we would take the time to read it and look to Christ about that.
That's great.
Yeah. Nonetheless, I pray for Tye. He's a huge impact on the church, especially the minority church. Many of us plays music all the time. To me, he's the best praise artist in America with fast-paced music. He puts out the best. Historically, he's put out the best stuff. And so with that level of impact and influence, which I appreciate, I hope either he clarifies something he misspoke in that interview, because I'd give the benefit of the doubt that that's a global audience. That group in there are famously known for kind of being bullies and bulldogs in the room. And so you could walk in that room and be a little scared, like, am I going to get eaten alive? Are they going to be for me, against me? And so maybe nerves get the best, and you're trying to be relatable, and you think that's what's going to win them. And I'm hoping maybe he reflects. I didn't tend to think to, because he collaborated on the post, knowing that it would be that. So it wasn't just like he was clipped out of thin air. He saw it and he agreed with it. But I just hope either he clarifies, say, hey, this misheard, or I've been hearing you guys ever since then, and maybe I've changed my mind, or he just fully says,
Right.
hey, I think I was wrong on that. I was, that's my prayer. I hope he doesn't lean on that, because he's a person of influence, and that can really affect, like you're saying, Aaron, a lot of young people's view of God's church, not God's person. It's God's people. It is His bride that He's coming back with, and the institution of the church was given by God for our development, for us to make an impact, to be salt and light. What we can do together is better than what we could do individually, and that's why God's church exists, for our spiritual development, our discipleship, and also winning those to Christ, being salt and light. So I hope he sees that as an importance, or just clarify something later on.
Yeah, I see stuff like this, and then I just pray for people. I just pray for leaders. I believe the best for leaders. I would love to just have a conversation with him, just to ask questions. I would love for him to be on this podcast.
Yeah.
But I think some of the perspective and insight in going back and forth may not be best for the podcast today, because I think that there's just some things that he may be wrestling with.
Yeah.
And when you don't have, I don't even know him at all, but I respect his gift. I respect his influence. I believe the best for him. And I just care for God's church, and I care for people that will hear his influence, that aren't discipled yet, and be like, yeah, that's why I don't rock with my pastor anyway. And that just has unintended consequences.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, well, and it's going to happen. Like, I know I'm going to have a young person. Like, I saw this Tye Tribbett clip. Why do we have T-shirts with our church's name on it? And it's going to come. Some will come just out of a curiosity, but others would come out of Tye influence me to be like, start thinking ill that my church does shirts. It's like, okay, well, there's nothing wrong with that. Could it be wrong? Yeah, it could be wrong. If there are levels of anything, you could start to make it wrong. But in it of itself, you walking in the city wearing your church's name proudly, is that some type of sin that he made? But there is going to be someone more impressionable who's going to be like, ooh, I got a problem now, because that my church has bumper stickers.
Right.
It's ridiculous. And it's like, you gotta analyze that. Could it be wrong? Yeah, of course it could be wrong. But the likelihood that in and of itself is going to be really slim. That you're going to find that for sure. Yeah. But yeah, great conversation. I think it originally started some people that are beyond the letter family were sending it to us, to wanting our thoughts on it. So hopefully we opened up some conversation around the subject. And I know where Aaron's going, he's going to go into his prayer closet. And
we could pray for
him
right now on this podcast.
He's going to face Jerusalem.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, everybody. God bless you. Peace.